I guess let's talk about it. The 49ers off a 3-game losing streak.
Lovely. As if I haven't heard enough about this shit over the last 2 weeks. Let's do it.
I'm sure you've definitely been inundated by it, being that you are in the Bay Area. But yes, we do have to continue this conversation. The San Francisco 49ers, 3-game losing streak. Obviously, my mental health is in a state of disarray at this point, especially coming off just that crushing of Dallas 3 weeks ago. Hey, Micah Parsons said it, and I'll co-sign what he said. The NFL has a way of humbling you. And I think the Niners, they got humbled coming off of that primetime showing. They go into Cleveland. I wrote off some excuses for them. Hey, West Coast team going to the East Coast, earlier start time, couple injuries, bad weather, kicker misses a couple of kicks in that game. Okay, you move on, you lick your wounds, you go into the next week. Then the Minnesota Vikings happens, and the running game was inconsistent. The defense couldn't stop anyone. Brock Purdy with a couple late turnovers. And now, okay, 2-game losing streak. That's not good. Then we get into the Cincinnati game. Cincinnati coming off bye week. Again, defense can't stop anyone. No pass rush to be seen on the field out there. Running game struggles again. And Brock Purdy, once again, a couple late turnovers. It's been a bit of a mess the last 3 weeks. And I know that a lot of people are going to start off with the quarterback conversation. And I think that's a fair point to start off. These last 3 weeks of Brock Purdy, has this changed any perspective? Has this completely overshadowed anything we said about Brock Purdy in the first 5 weeks of the season?
It hasn't overshadowed a lot of the stuff with Brock Purdy. I mean, I implored people to evaluate with a small sample size on Brock Purdy. Please look at the sample size metrics for Brock Purdy. But the other part of it was that Brock Purdy probably has some kind of injury, right? He had concussion-like symptoms coming out of the Vikings game. People deduced that he was like 2 for 6 with 2 interceptions after the play where he likely sustained a concussion against Minnesota. So like from the Brock Purdy standpoint, I think that's not the reason why the 49ers have dropped 3 games in a row, but that's probably the thing people will point to in saying, see, look at this guy who's now, I think, thrown 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions over the last 3 games. Like, that's the easy thing that people will point to as a result, but it's not the reason the 49ers are 5-3.
Yeah, I think more concerning than Brock Purdy. And yes, I am concerned to the extent that he's throwing interceptions, which was something that was uncharacteristic of the early goings of his career. I am concerned in that respect, and I do hope that they will correct it because he's still making good throws. Kurt Warner actually pointed this out, that he's still making good throws in the game. Kyle Shanahan even pointed out that you do look at some of the highlight reel throws that he's making, and they are impressive. There was this one scramble that he had on like 3rd down late in the red zone, and he made magic happen. So I'm still walking away knowing that there's something there, that there's something to Brock Purdy that's just not all fiction. I don't know how much the concussion played into it, but that's for a doctor to say more than for me to say. But what I would say is more concerning is that defense, man. As imposing as they were through those first 5 weeks, they have just not had any of that same energy in the last 3. Like, PJ Walker was trying his best to give them the game in Cleveland. Defense couldn't take advantage of those. But against Minnesota and Cincinnati, they have just failed and struggled to stop anyone. I think I saw Rodgers is allowing 100% like completion percentage against him when he's targeted. And, that's just downright disgusting numbers for any defensive back to allow. And I wonder, obviously the trade deadline's today. We'll see. There's probably some takes that will aid. I think the Niners should do their best to acquire help. Who that player is, if it happens, that's, we're not going to get too much into the weeds on that one because who knows? That's going to be dated by the time we release this video. But what I would say is they should be trying to make a move because this defense needs some sort of spark to it. And it sucks when you have the highest paid defensive player in the league now in Nick Bosa. You have Hargraves, who you'd spend all this money on, and you can't get to the passer. I know Richard Sherman, he's calling for Steve Wilks' head. I know a lot of Niners fans are calling for Steve Wilks' head. There's just a different energy. You go back to the Minnesota game, there's the all-out blitz before the halftime, which you look at that and you're like, is that the game right there? you don't allow that touchdown and suddenly you're talking about winning that game. But at the same time, Travis Ward should have intercepted that ball too. So, it's kind of funny how like that kind of stuff like shifts around the narrative. But I do think that Steve Wilks is an obvious downgrade from what they've had in Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans over the last couple of years. There seems to be some sort of odd chemistry that hasn't really developed between how he calls plays, how the Niners want him to call plays. And I think that that's been one of the biggest issues for the Niners as they've struggled the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, the thing that I've pointed out with like the overreacting on Wilks is like if they were 6-2 and still winning the division, there wouldn't be this level of outrage towards Steve Wilks. Now, I think people are pointing to like the touchdown that Addison had that Ward ripped away. How could you possibly call engage 8 on that defensive play when it was right at the end of the half? And like fair criticism, that's a misstep on his part for the play calling. But I think that the 49ers defense, it was a very good unit before, and it's taken a step back here in the last couple of weeks. But I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, right? They probably weren't as good as when they were holding the Cowboys to 10 points, but or the Steelers, who are a bad offense, they basically kept them from scoring the entire game. They're probably not that, but they're also probably not as bad as giving up 22 consecutive completions to Joe Burrow, right? Like the answer is somewhere in the middle. Diamador Lenore has had just an awful 2 weeks. Like it's been a tough break for him. I don't know if he's battling injury or what the deal is with that, but it just has been tough on him. Obviously, people are talking about needing to trade for a corner. They want them to get in on Jalen Johnson or Kenny Moore or one of these corners that's available at the trading deadline. And, fair criticism, Isaiah Oliver hasn't quite been the answer they were hoping for. But yeah, defensively, it's been strange to see that regression. I would assume the answer is somewhere in the middle for what they'll be by the time the end of the season rolls around, especially if they get Dre Greenlaw healthy so that he's actually performing. Like he's out there, but he's not really like giving them the performances they need from Greenlaw. Yeah, I mean, defensively, there's a lot of things you can point to that are iffy for the 49ers, but things that I wouldn't be like hitting the panic, like we need to massively shake this thing up. Like all the pieces are there. They've been relatively healthy. And now, well, the offensive side of the ball, that's another question because we can point to regression on the offensive side of the ball, but defensively, I don't think it's time to like hit the panic button or anything like that. Yeah. Sorry, Steve Wilks is not as good as D'Amico Ryans. Apologies. It's really hard to find Robert Saleh or D'Amico Ryans from a coaching staff pool that is available to everyone. I know people are pointing out like, but Wilks is the highest paid defensive coordinator in the league. And I understand that point. Absolutely. But he's not D'Amico Ryans. Sorry. It's tough break. I don't think we have to jump the gun that far on it. Cause if they were 6-2, there wouldn't be this kind of outrage.
Well, yes, there would be in the sense that if the defense was still struggling and they were 6-2, like if they were able to escape with a victory against Minnesota or even Cincinnati, and the defense was still working at this pace, there would have still been some outrage because there is the tangible difference. And I think a lot of Niners fans are also upset because what was available to them this offseason, a lot of Niners fans were advocating for a Vic Fangio reunion. Obviously, Vic Fangio, he ended up taking his talents to Miami. This was one of the first times, too, in the Kyle Shanahan administration in which they went outside of the organization for defensive coordinator. Robert Saleh was this guy that he hired right when he got there, and he had him up until the point where Robert Saleh obviously got his opportunity with the Jets. And then D'Amico was right behind him as the linebacker coach, elevated him easily to the DC position. And then once he got the job in Houston, well, now it's like, okay, who do we hire? Do we want to go in-house? Do we want to elevate Chris Kasarik? Kasarik, they were lucky to still keep him in-house, but you go out there and get Wilks, and it feels as though, at least through the early goings here, like you made the wrong choice. And I know one of the big conversations on Twitter has been, or X or whatever, has been, should Steve Wilks step out of the booth and onto the field? Now, I would say if I was in those guys' positions, I think there would be some advantages to being in the booth. You can see the whole game. You have access to technology right there and then. You don't have as many bodies getting in your way, getting in your ear. So at least it's an opportunity to like really sit down and study what you need to study. But when you compare that to D'Amico, who was on the field, who was in his guy's ear, who was hyping the guys up. You know, we talked about what Deebo brought to the Houston Texans, that leader of men aspect. I do think that there is that drop off there. So I don't know if it would make a tangible difference to have Steve Wilks step down from the booth and onto the field, because if he can't bring that same energy that Deebo had, I don't know if that really matters, right? Like, unless you're going to be the hype guy on the field, like when you step out of that booth, I don't think it really matters if he was going to step onto the sideline to call plays. So, you know, that's my piece on Steve Wilks. As far as the Niners offense, you said they've been lucky to not really deal with injuries. Well, to an extent, obviously Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel being out the last couple of weeks has hurt them. I guess I didn't realize how much it wouldn't necessarily hurt them. You know, I would have to deep dive into the tape and just say, like, oh, if Deebo was there, this guy would have been open. Or if Trent Williams was there, this block would have been taken care of. So I don't know, like, how much of a drop off Jalen Moore was in the grand scheme of things. I know that they were able to have like a 70-something PFF grade. But, you know, you compare that to Trent Williams, who consistently is high 90s in his PFF grade. You know, so losing that guy, that's nothing to, like, dismiss. Obviously, you losing all pros is not a good thing. So not having Deebo on the field, not having Trent Williams on the field, you need those guys if you really want to win a Super Bowl, which I think for Niners fans, it's not about winning the NFC West. Obviously, now you're in a position where you're down in the NFC West. It's about winning the Super Bowl. So you want these guys healthy at the right time, but you also don't want to fuck yourself over in seeding too, because now you're 5-3. The Eagles are 6-1. That game in Philadelphia a few weeks from now, it kind of lost its level of importance a little bit in the grand scheme. So, you know, that does hurt them overall when it comes down to winning the ultimate prize.
Want to give a shout out to my guy, Emil Fergoso. He's our Niners insider at the radio station. He goes out to training camp and practice once a week and stuff like that. And he made this point in the preseason, and it stands to be. This is why he said they would go 10-7 at the start of the season, which is the most valuable player on the San Francisco 49ers. On paper, the most talented team in the NFL, other than maybe the team in Philadelphia. But let's say that for all intents and purposes, the most valuable player on the most talented team in the NFL is a left tackle. Trent Williams is the most valuable player on the San Francisco 49ers. And if he goes down, they don't have a suitable replacement to match the production that Trent Williams is giving them. Granted, I'm not a big X's and O's tape guy, so I can't really give you the evaluation of who was better or who was worse, or like how losing Trent Williams impacted the game. But it's clear that,
yeah, if, you know, I was to kind of like theorize of the major impact, I would say look at the running game the last 3 weeks and how there's been a significant drop off there. If not if not for pass blocking, I think certainly in run blocking, because you look at what Trent Williams does when Kyle Shanahan tells him, hey, go take out that cornerback, go run over that 180-pound cornerback right there and break open a hole for Christian McCaffrey to run through. That's something that Trent Williams is able to do, unlike any other left tackle in the league.
And the second part of it, which I haven't seen data from the Bengals game, so I don't know how this changed, but in the 2 weeks against Cleveland and against Minnesota, Brock Purdy averaged 0.6 seconds less of snap to throw time as compared to when Trent Williams was on the field, which I know it's 0.6 seconds. That's a lot of fucking time. Like, by NFL metrics, that's the difference between, like, if you're subtracting 0.6 seconds, that's the difference between like first and like ninth in the NFL in terms of snap to throw time. And I don't think that the Niners were number one by any stretch, because their offense is predicated on getting the ball out faster. Weren't number one and longest in the first place. But besides the point, like, that's a big difference in snap to throw time. And again, I don't know what happened last week, but you can see like the basic numbers of rushing attack has gone down in yards, even as they've maintained a similar number of carries, and snap to throw time has gone down. That, yeah, what's the thing that's changed? Trent Williams is out. Now, are these selective facts? Absolutely. It's a very, very small sample size that we're working with, in addition to the fact that the other thing that's changed in those 2 weeks is Brock Purdy turning the ball over a lot more, and they're trusting him to throw the ball more on offense, because regardless of Brock Purdy playing poorly or good in the last game, he had the most passing yards of his NFL career in the game against the Bengals. He threw more passing yards in that game than any previous game in his career. And you know what the final score was? 31-17. And by the way, it wasn't a 17 where like they missed a field goal or something. It was just 17. They just gave you 17 points on offense. And by the way, this is why it's easier to explain what's happened to the offense for the Niners. In the first loss of the season, 17 points. The second loss of the season, 17 points. Third loss of the season, 17 points. They are a 17-point per game offense since all these injuries started piling up. And if you remember, in their first 5 games, they were the only team in the NFL to score 30 or more points in all 5 games.
It was getting to a point there early on where I was ready to call this offense a walking 30. In the same way we talk about NBA players and just say he's a walking bucket, I was calling this Niners offense a walking 30 points. But like you mentioned, in the last 3 weeks, it's been a walking 17, which has left them walking away with 3 L's consecutively. So, this Niners team, they're in a tough position, but, this bye week, I guess you could say this bye week couldn't have come at a better time because you will get Trent Williams back after the bye. You will get Deebo Samuel back after the bye. Anyone else that has some injuries, you'll allow them a little bit extra time to get ready. I did see that Aaron Banks, turf toe, he's going to be out for 3 weeks. So that's unfortunate. They're losing left guard that was really coming into his own. Like Aaron Banks really stepped up last season with Laken Tomlinson gone. But if Aaron Banks can't go for another 2 weeks, that's going to suck. They're obviously going to have to rotate pieces inside. I know they built up a lot of versatility as far as their offensive line backups. So hopefully someone could step up there and at least plug that hole for a little bit. But you get Trent Williams back, you're good. After the bye, they have games against Jacksonville, Tampa coming up. I mentioned that Philadelphia game. So it is going to be a tough stretch for the Niners. And let's not forget, they also face the Seahawks, which those Seahawks games just become that much more important than they were earlier on in the season because now
I think
you
if
need
I remember
those
correctly,
to walk away.
If I remember correctly, I think they go Seahawks, Philadelphia, Seahawks too at that stretch of the season.
I think one of them is a Thursday night game, if I'm not mistaken, either.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough stretch for them. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on before we go is about Kyle Shanahan. Since the last time we talked about this, I learned this stat, and we added in the Bengals game that Kyle Shanahan is 0-37 in games where he's been trailing in the fourth quarter by 5 points. I think it was 5 points or fewer, and it's like 0-12 in games where it's 10 points or more, which makes sense, right? We don't think of Kyle Shanahan as the guy who comes back in games and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like we think of Shanahan blowing big leads and poor clock management in pressure situations and stuff like that. Like Kyle Shanahan has built a machine that I've before. Like football people don't even understand it, and football's hard enough to understand in the first place. Like, and it's really hard to understand how he does it. But the results have been a machine that's really good at sitting on leads. Like when they get a 10-point lead, when they get a 14-point lead, they have a machine that is very, very good at sitting on leads offensively and the defensive side that's been programmed. And the other thing that's changed in the last couple of weeks is that they haven't gotten those leads to sit on. And I think part of that is the defense falling apart a little bit.
Absolutely. This team, if they're going to win games, how they win games, they win it on the backs of their defense. If they can't rely on their defense anymore, then that's a problem because you mentioned that stat, the Niners' key to victory, get a lead, have the defense, pin their ears back, rush the passer, and they haven't been able to do that the last 3 weeks. They've fallen behind early. They put themselves in uncomfortable positions. And then battling out those uncomfortable positions, as you mentioned, has just been something that consistently Kyle Shanahan in his time in San Francisco has not been able to do. Will that be their ultimate undoing on their road to trying to win a Super Bowl? Hard to say, but it doesn't look good to have that on your resume. A legitimate 0-36 or whatever it is now is not a good number to have on your resume in those spots. But anyway, guys, let us know below in the comments section. What do you think of the Niners coming off this 3-game losing streak? Do you think that they still can correct themselves and get back to where they want to be by the end point of the season? Like to hear where you're feeling about this team. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.